have back with us Middle Eastern modern politics specialist, Professor Osamu Miyata of Shizuoka University, who was also an exchange student to Hebron University in Israel. Professor Miyata, welcome back to 44 Minutes.
Good to be here.
Now, fighting has continued over the weekend despite U.S. President George W. Bush's first direct telephone call to Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to pull Israeli forces out of Palestinian cities. Professor Miyata, how do you view the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, Israel army has been advancing in the Palestinian autonomy areas, and it has been expanding its military domination in the West Bank and Gaza. The Secretary of State, Colin Powell of the United States, is visiting Israel and Palestine. Before his visit, Sharon wants to establish dominant position for Israel. His intention and the message is clear. Sharon thinks that if Israel shows its military power, Palestinians will admit Israeli hegemony and cannot help following orders made by Israel. Sharon doesn't see any chance of negotiation with Yasser Arafat. Sharon belongs to the right wing of Israel. He is the head of the Likud party, which has the Great Israel concept. The Great Israel concept is the ideology which regards the whole Palestine as the Israeli territory. Sharon doesn't have any intention of making any concession regarding territories. He doesn't want to give any territories to Palestinians. However, military suppression is not a solution at all. Some Palestinians see the suicide attack is the only way to counter the dominant Israeli army. I am sure if Israel continue its military suppression, Palestinians will continue their suicide attack against Israel.
Now, Professor, you just mentioned the suicide attacks by the Palestinians, the military suppression by Israel, and it seems as though it's been continuing for a while, and that as long as it continues, there's no way out of this conflict. Now, what must be done? Who must do what for there to be a breakthrough?
Israel shouldn't raise any conditions for the negotiations with Palestinians. At the moment, it is very difficult to stop the suicide attack by Palestinians completely. So, Israel should resume peace negotiations with Arafat as soon as possible. Israel and the Palestinians must revive the Oslo Agreement concluded in 1993. The Oslo Agreement is the only realistic option for the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. It advocates the coexistence of Israel and the Palestinians, establishing the Palestinian state, and finally realize eternal peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Israel, Palestinians, and the international community must remember that agreement. Some countries, such as the U.S. and the European countries, should mediate Israel and the Palestinians.
The U.S. finally started taking some action last week. U.S. President Bush has asked Israeli Prime Minister Sharon to pull forces out of Palestinian cities, and U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell is to visit the Middle East this week to try to revive truce talks. Professor, how effective do you think these moves by the United States will be?
The U.S. is a very important country for the Middle East peace process, namely the Palestinian issue, because the U.S. is the only country which can put pressure on Israel. The U.S. has been supplying weapons to Israel and the biggest aid-giving country for Israel. Israel was established on the basis of the UN resolution in 1947. However, Israel doesn't have any confidence on the United Nations because the United Nations always passes the unfavorable resolutions for Israel. The Secretary of State, Colin Powell, will demand that the Israel army should retreat from the Palestinian territories. Israel Prime Minister Sharon may accept Powell's demand. However, if the Palestinian suicide attack will happen again, Sharon will send Israel army to the territories again. The Bush administration cannot criticize the Sharon's measure strongly enough to stop Israeli military action in the West Bank and Gaza, because the Jewish lobbies have a great influence in the U.S., and the Bush administration cannot resist the Jewish society's demand in the U.S. The U.S. policies towards the Middle East are determined by its domestic factors, such as the Jewish lobby activities. So, the U.S. will defend the Israeli position and cannot satisfy the Palestinians. For the time being, I'm pessimistic about the U.S. mediation in the Palestinian issue.
Now, what about the strong stance that Prime Minister Sharon is taking? Who or what do you think is supporting the expansion of military invasion?
As I told you before, Prime Minister Sharon belongs to the right-wing political party. It is difficult for him to make any concessions to Palestinians regarding territories. In addition, whenever suicide attack by the Palestinians happens, the Israeli public opinion becomes firm and hawkish against Palestinians. Sharon's policies are supported by such Israeli public opinion. In addition, some Israelis think Sharon's strict policy against the Palestinians will be useful for their security. In Israel, peace-seeking groups are much weaker than the hawkish groups now, because the Israelis have been suffering from Palestinians' attack.
Now, what do you think is driving the Palestinians?
Well, the Palestinians are continuing their attack against Israel, even though they know Israeli retaliation. It is because their lives are miserable and hopeless. Their economic plight is very bad comparing with the Israelis. Unemployment rate is very high. More than 80% of people don't have their jobs. The Palestinians are confined in narrow territories. They are suppressed by the dominant Israeli military power. Chairman Arafat cannot stop the Palestinian attack against Israel because Palestinians commit their suicide attack on their own initiative.
Now, Professor, you mentioned that there are peace-seeking groups in Israel, that they are weaker. But, for example, it is said that the coalition ruling Labour Party is supportive of peace. Now, their voices are not reflected in the actions of the Israeli army or the military actions. Why is the Labour Party's power so weak?
Well, the Labour Party has been advocating land for peace measures, which means Israel obtains peace by returning land to Palestinians. As the head of the Labour Party, Ehud Barak, won the Prime Minister election in 1999, there are many peace-seeking opinions in Israel. However, as Palestinian suicide attacks happen again and again, hawkish opinion is prevailing in Israel, as it seems that Palestinian suicide attacks never stop. About 70% of Israeli people are supporting Prime Minister Sharon's hardline policy against Palestinians.
Now, given that, Professor, what's next for Palestinian leader Arafat?
Well, Prime Minister Sharon is thinking of expelling Chairman Arafat from Palestine. Mr. Sharon thinks Arafat is instigating or commanding the suicide attack against Israel. But I don't think so. The suicide attacks have been carried out without any orders from Arafat. They are voluntary actions, so Sharon cannot blame Arafat for suicide attacks against Israel. Mr. Sharon tried to expel Arafat from Lebanon in 1982. At that time, Arafat fled to Tunisia from Lebanon under the protection of the U.S. However, if Arafat leaves Palestine, no one can take over his leadership at the moment. This will bring about chaos in the Palestinian society. Radical groups such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad will prevail in Palestine. Mr. Arafat will appeal to the brutality of Israel to the public sentiment in the Arab and Islamic world and the international community to gather sympathy with the Palestinians. Mr. Arafat should remain in Palestine. He is still an important figure to negotiate with Israel.
Now, if we could go back to talking about the U.S. intervention or mediation, you mentioned that the U.S. is the only country which can put pressure on Israel, but that you're also pessimistic about how much intervention or mediation the U.S. can do in this issue. There has also been some criticism that the U.S. has taken too long to make or do anything about this issue. Do you think that the Bush administration is fairly serious this time around?
Yeah. Well, President Bush is demanding the withdrawal of the Israeli army without any delay. He is beginning to realize that the anti-Israel sentiment is so strong in the Islamic world and the international community. Actually, the Israeli army has been killing the Palestinian citizens. If the U.S. cannot stop the Israeli military action against Palestinians, President Bush knows anti-U.S. feeling will grow more and more in the Islamic world. So the U.S. cannot help mediating Israel and the Palestinians. In addition, the U.S. is trying to attack Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein's regime. The U.S. needs the understanding and the cooperation of the Arab countries to attack Iraq. President Bush is sending its important cabinet member, the Secretary of State Colin Powell. So one can judge that the U.S. is serious about mediation between Israel and the Palestinians. However, seeing the hardline policy of the Shah administration, it is doubtful whether the mediation will succeed.
Now, Saudi Arabia's peace proposal was adopted at the Arab Summit in Beirut recently, but it doesn't seem as though the Arab countries all have the same stance.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is insisting that if Israel returns all the Palestinian territories to the Palestinians, Arab countries will normalize the relationship with Israel. Saudi Prince Abdullah is advocating it because he knows anti-Israel and anti-U.S. feelings are so strong in Saudi Arabia. It is said that about 95% of Saudi youth is supporting Osama bin Laden's cause. So the Saudi royal family has to be much conscious of the Islamic radicals movements and feelings in Saudi Arabia. That is why the Saudi government is criticizing Israel so strongly to divert Saudi Arabians' dissatisfaction with their society and economic conditions.
Now, it seems as though not only the Arab nations, but that the international society should be doing something about the military invasion on the exchanges. Now, what should Japan do, and what role do you think Japan can play right now in the Middle East?
Well, Japan has been supporting the Palestinians since the Oslo Agreement was concluded in 1993. And Japan doesn't have any bad relationship with Israel. So Japan can play a certain role in the Palestinian issue. Japan doesn't have a strong political power, so Japan's influence is limited. However, Japan's foreign ministry is thinking of holding a peace conference between Israel and the Palestinians in Tokyo. Such effort is necessary and important for the advancement of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. The international community needs constant mediation efforts to create peace in Palestine. The international community should demand Israel to stop military action as soon as possible. And even though the Palestinian suicide attack is continuing, Israel stops negotiation with the Palestinians when the Palestinians' violent attack against Israel happens. It is not a good way to advance peace process. Israel and the Palestinians need incessant negotiations. The international community should revive the Oslo Agreement in 1993 and support peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. It is very important for the stability of the international community too. The Palestinians issue is one reason for the Islamic radicals' terrorist activities.
What can the rest of the world possibly do to make progress in this situation?
The international community needs urgent action to stop violence in Palestine. The international community can pass resolutions at the United Nations to criticize the military suppression of Israel against the Palestinians, and the international community should demand the retreat of Israeli army from the Palestinian territories. We should demand both parties to resume negotiation and continue it. Israel and the Palestinians should continue their dialogue even while terrorist attacks are happening.
Now, right now, you said that Mr. Arafat should remain in Palestine.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is said that, or heard that he has made comments that maybe he should become a martyr for the Palestinian independence cause.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think he means by that comment?
Actually, I think Arafat is not controlling the whole matters in the Palestine, but Arafat should make efforts to advance the peace process with Israel. I think there are much to do for Arafat.
And as you said, there's much to do also with the international community as well to stop the action or violence.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep an eye and see how the situation develops. Professor, thank you for being with us today.
Welcome.
Our guest today was Professor Osamu Miyata.